I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Culprit. I think today we were going to chat about the second season of The Last Thing He Told Me, which, to start with, that immediately makes me irritated because it's based on the second book, which is not called that.
Yeah, what is it? The first time I saw him?
Yeah, yeah. Thoughts?
Well, to sound like a broken record, the book is just always better. And I think it was worse this time around because they released it at the same time. So we had read the book right before we watched the second season, and it did not compare favorably.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to start with, of course, the book is always better. Better you sounding like a broken record than me, because I feel like I say that constantly. Constantly regarding anything that is adapted. And I always get excited when something is adapted. And I don't know why, because it's pretty much always a letdown. It's just, I get that they can't, well, actually, I don't get, but that they can't adhere, page for page to the book. But when you change things that are just unnecessary, and then when you exclude things, like Frank and Nicholas, like their past. There was a lot of that in the book, and I thought that that really, I don't want to say it humanized Frank, but it humanized Nicholas, and I liked that.
Yeah, yeah. And I is it so I'm gonna hopefully I'm gonna pronounce his name correctly. I like Nicola Coster-Waldau.
Good job. Yeah, I was gonna say, how can I just say Nick? Yeah.
I really like Nick. That's what we're gonna go
Yeah.
with. And like I'm glad he had like a significant part in the second season. But in the book he really didn't. And while I wanted him to be in more of it, definitely, it made more sense with how it ended, and it ended better as opposed to, I don't think we're gonna get into super spoilers, but it ended really like we're gonna have a third season. I'm not sure I want to watch a third season.
Yeah, and of course we'll just say the bad family. I can't remember Frank's. Do you remember their last name?
I think it's Campano.
Ah, good job. Yeah. Uh, I mean, I just felt I didn't to start with, they were hardly in the book. A little bit the kids, Quinn and Tommy. Is that right?
Teddy.
Teddy. See, sorry, I really did read it, really did watch it. Um, they just had a lot smaller parts, and I just felt kind of, especially Teddy in the show, was kind of like a caricature of, like, what you would think, like, the wayward son of a crime family would be. Does
Yeah.
that Yeah, and love Jennifer Garner. She really, I can watch her pretend cooking show, she can just paint the walls, love her. So, no diss to her, and I wanna say that I wasn't like the book, obviously, but I liked, she got to do, like a little bit of an action, fighting, the bad guy, and I liked that for her because I think she tries to, stay really physical in her personal life, so I liked that.
Yeah.
Um and I wanna say in the first book, the daughter, oh my god, Bailey, she so annoyed me. I didn't like her, and I really didn't love the actress in that sounds awful, in, the first series, but both in the book, and I will give kudos to, the second season, I thought she was okay. She made stupid decisions that weren't in the book, obviously,
Ugh.
in the series, but I thought, I don't know, she didn't grate on me as much. What do you what do you think?
Well, I'm gonna be more unkind. Yeah, I liked her in the second book, really disliked her in the first book. I get it, she's a teenager, most teenagers are unlikable, hot take there, not really, but, so I really liked her in the second book, and in the second season, I'm just like, "Girl, you are not making good choices."
Yeah, it's so true. I don't know if I get that an author does not do the screenplay, and I feel like the screenwriter wants to, I don't know, solidify their position by making changes, but I just wonder if the author is like cringing, like, that's not how I see that," or, that's not how I wrote that," or, my character wouldn't do that." I don't know. We'll just lament all the time. The books are always better.
Yeah, and I don't know, I kinda feel like so we've read all of Laura Dave's books, that's the author, obviously, and I would probably categorize all of them as, like, women's fiction, why can't we just call it fiction? I mean, all books focus on relationships, like, why is that necessarily women's fictions? But I really felt like the series, and definitely the 2nd season more than the 1st, was trying to go more thriller, action angle, and I just don't think that was central or at the core of the book. Yes, obviously, he has, like, another identity, there's some thriller action, the past stuff, there's murder, all that stuff, I get it, but it was more women's fiction, and with that, the writing and the characters, they weren't just better, they were just better, but, like, so I felt with this show, it came across a lot more one-dimensional to get all those actiony fight scenes in there, which I mean, no shade to you if you're into, like, Marvel action scenes, but that just wasn't how the book was, so that was a real letdown for me.
It's a good point. Yeah, I know several off topic, but Taylor Jenkins Reid books are supposed to be adapted, and I'm just scared that
Uh-huh.
they're gonna try to do I mean, not the same premise, so maybe not, but just try to mess with it. Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of action movies, and again, kudos to Jennifer Garner, that
Uh-huh.
was fine, but, like, in the book, there was more, like, on the run stuff, and there was more I like that. I thought that that was, I don't know, engaging, and I thought we got it was way deeper, the relationship between Hannah and Bailey, and
Uh-huh.
though I questioned it a little bit in the book because, again, as a teenager in the first book, she's just, she's awful, um, that I found it, like, just maybe just a tiny bit unbelievable that but maybe not because that's her, her only, quote, unquote, "parent." Just their relationship, I guess, it was more they kind of explained it more obviously in the book than they did in the show, and then it also irritates me. I feel like Laura Day, like all her books, but I kind of felt like because the first season was successful, she was pressured, obviously, into writing a second book so they could do a
Uh-huh.
second season, and I don't know. Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, if you've seen the first season, you probably wanna see the second, so but it doesn't like you said, it doesn't necessarily tie it up, it kind of completely leaves you like, "Oh, gee, is that gonna be an opening for a 3rd season?"
Uh-huh.
But, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, going to what you said about, like, it not making as much sense in the movie, Hannah and Bailey's relationship, going back to, when I mentioned, like, women's fiction is that because it focuses on relationships, like, that's not always romantic relationships, like, human
Right.
relationships are at, like, the heart of anything, and I felt like with the book, it really did dive into Hannah and Bailey's, sorry, their relationship and how that trust built up, and it felt almost like including Owen more in the show, it made it seem like Hannah was more hung up on him, and not that she, like, hadn't, lived her life and stuff, but it wasn't really about that in the book. Yes, she loved him. Yes, hopefully, they have a future together and stuff, but it was really about her relationship with Bailey, and that felt neglected in the show.
That's a really good point, and also her whole, from the note he leaves her, what is it? "Take care of Bailey." Is that the note in the first book?
I
Anyways,
wanna say it's keep her safe.
keep her okay. Take care of her, keep her safe. That's, like, the whole point, and in the book, like, you really felt like, even though I felt like, oh, it's just a little bit far-fetched, that she really, changed her whole life and had all these plans, and it really was I mean, she took that to heart and built their relationship and kept her safe, and she would have never left her in the book. She would have never I get Bailey's an adult, but come on, there are bad people after them. Um, I felt yeah, like, I almost felt like Owen's back, like, "Oh, let's rekindle that," and, yes, of course, we have done all these things to keep Bailey safe, but it kind of felt like she was pushed to the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. People I mean, I bet the screenwriter was a man.
Maybe.
Maybe. I just you're right, it just relationships don't have to be romantic. They could have really flushed that out like the book, and I think that that would have been better, and it would have been okay to just leave it at the 2nd season. So,
Yeah.
there you go. No, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know that there's gonna be a 3rd season. I've looked a couple times, and, the Google machine always, gives, super, super vague answers. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's like, there doesn't need to be a romantic relationship in every action movie as, the, aging, male protagonist gets a new, younger love interest each time. Is that really necessary? Don't think so.
Each and every time. I mean, yeah, I'm all for let's have a Helen Mirren, have like, some 40-year-old, well, maybe 50, because she's I think she's
Yeah,
in her
maybe
late
50.
maybe she's in her 70s. But yeah, why is it always like that? Just the world we live in, I guess.
Yep, but, like you said, I mean, the 2nd season's probably worth a watch if you watch first, so
Yeah, and go Jennifer Garner. And no, what was it? Not Nicholas, Nikolai?
I think it ends with a J, so I wanna say Nicola, but maybe it is Nikolai.
And he's Dutch, right? I think he's Dutch.
I think so.
Yeah, anyways. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy as an actor that he got a bigger part, just that's just not how the book was. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anywho,
Alright, any other complaints?
well, I think that's good for now.
Okay. When Count Carl von Cosel spotted Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos while working as a radiographer at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West in 1930, it was love at first sight. He immediately recognized his tuberculosis patient as the dark haired woman a long dead relative had shown him in his youth. But his efforts to win her affection soon made it clear that Elena hadn't received the same supernatural message. Carl, though, remained undeterred. He had finally found the love of his life, and not even death would get in his way of having her. Born in Dresden, Germany on February 8, 1877, Georg Karl Tenzler was soon visited by his ancestor, Countess Anna Constantia von Cosel. The Countess came to him to reveal the image of the girl Carl would go on to believe was his future soulmate. As much as this fateful visitation marked the young boy, he had another interest that would stay with him long past childhood: planes and flying. Eager to feel the wind in his hair, he crafted himself a pair of wings and a tail by attaching silk to bamboo sticks. He would find something to jump off of and momentarily sail through the air.
Okay, that is such a boy thing.
I mean, all kids can be a bit reckless. I 100% agree when it comes to adults, though. More men definitely seem to lack concern for their well being. I immediately think of, what was it? Epic or Fail on the Ellen DeGeneres show, where the men in the videos would try these stupidest stunts, and it was pretty much always men attempting them.
Oh my god, yes. Before Ellen became problematic, I seem to remember there was, I don't know, yeah, like a scaffolding or I don't know, piece of wood and somebody jumps on it and, hits them in their face. Yeah, men don't make the best decisions sometimes.
Yeah. Or like I feel like I have an image of someone jumping from the roof into the pool and they missed the pool.
Yeah. It's not funny, but yes, yes.
Anyhow, as for Carl, when his short flights were met with laughter, he responded by saving his hobby for moonlit nights. However, these escapades stopped altogether after his father told him of a hunter who had mistaken a man flying in a similar manner for a bird and shot him down.
But Carl didn't outgrow his desire for adventure. After the turn of the century, he decided he wanted to travel. Having left India for Australia with a plan to head out to the South Sea Islands, Carl was only meant to stay in the land down under while he gathered a couple of boats and equipment and familiarized himself with the local weather and sea conditions. That short stopover turned into an extended stay after he developed a fascination with engineering and electrical work. In the 10 years he called Australia home, he purchased several boats, property, and an organ. However, his attempt to build a trans-ocean flyer was cut short when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated and World War I was declared. The British military authorities imprisoned enemy aliens, like Carl, along with prisoners of war. He and other foreigners were held in internment camps at Trial Bay Jail in New South Wales for supposed safekeeping. This cliffside prison in which he was kept was reminiscent of a bleak castle with its turrets and stone walls. Following the sound of the morning bugle, the inmates would line up in the prison yard for roll call. They had breakfast in the dining hall and waited for the iron gates to open so they could venture down to the seashore for the day. In these hours of relative freedom before 5 o'clock, when another roll call was held and the gates were closed once more for the night, Carl thought to find a sense of purpose by building an organ with the limited tools he could acquire or make himself. He had always loved the instrument and had kept one in his room before he was forced to abandon everything he owned when the fighting broke out.
When the conflict finally came to a close, none of the prisoners were allowed to go back to where they had been living, but were instead sent to the prisoners' exchange in the Netherlands. As soon as Carl regained his freedom, he went searching for his mother, whom he hadn't spoken to since the start of the war. Having learned that she was safe, he lived with her for the next 3 years. He dedicated the organ he had built during his imprisonment to her. It was tuned and set up in her home, but when she encouraged Carl to go to his sister in the United States, she insisted he take it with him to remember her. Carl, with his organ in tow, ended up emigrating to the US in 1926 after making a solo sailing voyage to Cuba. Now nearing 50, he had gotten married to a woman named Doris Schaefer sometime in the last decade and had had 2 daughters with her. The marriage had long been strained by Carl's continuing travels, but after he found a place to live in Zephyr Hills, Florida, his wife and children joined him, perhaps hoping the big move would curb Carl's wanderlust. If they had been keeping their fingers crossed, they were soon disappointed when Carl left in 1927 to move to Key West, the island at the end of the Florida Keys where he became a radiographer at the U.S. Marine Hospital under the name Count Carl von Cosel. It was here that 3 years later, Carl would first lay eyes on Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos. Known as Elena, she was the second of 3 daughters of Key West cigar maker Francisco Hoyos and homemaker Aurora Milagro. Born on July 31st, 1909, Cuban American Elena was a staunch Catholic who spent her adolescence cooking for her family and friends, dancing at the social club La Brisa, and watching silent films starring Italian American Rudolph Valentino. A performer herself, Elena was a gifted singer whose looks and talent inspired random tourists to ask for pictures with her.
As was hardly uncommon at the time, when Elena was 16, she married Luis Mesa, with whom she was expecting a baby. Sadly, Elena miscarried. As if she wasn't dealing with enough, her loss was soon compounded by a persistent cough. Although her family originally believed that her grief had manifested in an illness, the cough showed no signs of abating. Even though the number of cases of tuberculosis were falling in the US in the 1920s, cigar factories like the one at which Elena's father worked were infection hotspots due to the poor ventilation and long hours. Elena's misfortunes multiplied when Luis abandoned her to start again in Miami. An increasingly ill Elena was left to move into a small room in her parents' home. Following a referral on April 22nd, 1930, Aurora brought her 20-year-old daughter to the U.S. Marine Hospital for testing. Not only was Elena given the then fatal prognosis of tuberculosis, she was now squarely in the orbit of her radiographer, 53-year-old Count Carl von Cosel.
Despite having no claims to the title, Carl had begun going by Count Carl von Cosel in reference to Countess von Cosel, his ancestor who had come to him as a child. Some Americans might do a double take when hearing a title of nobility in the States, but the residents of Key West were used to this so-called Count's quirks. He was nothing if not distinctive, with his wire-rimmed glasses, neatly groomed beard, and all-white outfits. Cane in hand, he would walk around town flaunting the watches he insisted were from the Tsar of Russia. He boasted of his many medals and licenses, not to mention his 9 university degrees, all of which were fake. He may have been lying about his laurels and annoying the hell out of his coworkers with his many opinions and his unchecked ego, but Carl was thought to be knowledgeable about X-ray technology. Capitalizing on the access his position afforded him to Elena, Carl took the responsibility of curing the young beauty upon himself. Beyond giving her special consideration while giving her radiation therapy at the hospital, such as by venturing from the standard practice of taking blood from her ear to instead draw from her finger in order not to disfigure her, Carl proposed a variety of free treatments to save his supposed soulmate.
Taking blood from the ear, was that the norm?
So, based on my admittedly limited research, it looks like testing capillary blood for C reactive protein, which indicates inflammation, is a standard way to screen for TB. For that test, either the fingertip or earlobe can be used, but it seems like the earlobe would be preferred for arterial sampling when it comes to measuring blood gases, which could have been the norm for any TB case.
Well, good job looking that up. I mean, I just honestly had never heard of blood being taken from an earlobe. So interesting.
No, I hadn't either, and we're going to hope that's all correct.
Due to the family's limited finances, they understandably agreed to any attempt to delay Elena's death sentence. Carl's endeavors included making a range of tonics and potions with gold, offering medicinal wines, and transporting the unorthodox electrical contraption he had made himself to her home for private sessions. These sessions involved connecting Carl's giant globe shaped machine to Elena's chest with electrodes. The sparks inside the device would then shock Elena. Carl insisted that these shocks emitted neutrons into the air and that these tiny particles would cure her. In his ongoing bid to win Elena over, Carl's efforts didn't end with stepping outside his medical purview. With his wife and children out of sight and out of mind in Zephyr Hills, he chose to also overlook Elena's absentee husband and repeatedly tried to buy her affection with clothes and jewelry. He went so far as to hand her a catalog with the instructions to choose anything that caught her eye. We can't know exactly how Elena responded to her radiographer's repeated declarations of love, but after the man who was old enough to be her grandfather began proposing the night her older sister, Florinda, or Nana, got married and wouldn't stop, her mother told him he was no longer welcome in their home. Nana, incidentally, would later maintain that Elena never loved Carl and that her tolerance of his romantic overtures was only the result of being taught that she should treat others with the same kindness they showed her.
In the time that Carl had been unwittingly tormenting Elena under the guise of treating her, the Milagro de Hoyos family had come to see the odd electrical machine he hooked Elena up to as the work of the devil. Now that they regarded him as more harmful than helpful, they refused to tell him their new address when they moved. To Carl, though, this was simply an obstacle to overcome.
A stalker in the making.
Truly, every night he would wander the streets in search of their new house until a neighbor finally pointed him in the right direction. With Elena on her deathbed, the family had little hope left. So they reversed their stance and again accepted his assistance, despite its sporadic nature and its implicit condition of further marriage proposals. Sometime during the year and a half that Carl had been tending to the woman he thought of as the love of his life, one of his daughters had died from diphtheria. Despite both this personal loss and the tension between him and Elena's family, he remained focused on extending the time she had left, which included painfully shocking her back to life twice. These near death experiences were so traumatic that Elena had no desire to endure a third. With those around her under firm instructions not to inform Carl of her death until enough time had passed that any life saving measures would be futile, Elena died on October 25th, 1931, at the age of 22.
Having raced to her bedside upon learning of her passing, Carl told her family that he would cover the cost of her burial. He also paid for a headstone from which her married name was conspicuously absent. He carefully chose the flowers, music, and clothes for Elena's funeral, but couldn't bring himself to say goodbye to her at the end of the event. If anything, grief exacerbated Carl's obsession. Carl returned to Key West Cemetery every day with flowers in hand. These daily drop ins gave him a firsthand view of the effect of the elements upon her grave, and he became concerned that rain would drip into her casket. He persuaded her family to unearth it, only to discover that she had begun to decompose. Carl was beside himself. He had given the mortician clear instructions for the embalming, but they must not have been followed. Determined to rectify the situation, Carl had the casket cleaned, Elena's decayed dress switched out for cloth, and the felt underneath her replaced. These were only temporary measures, though.
Having come up with a more permanent plan, Carl commissioned a domed mausoleum with a telephone inside and flower pots and palm trees outside, as well as a double casket to protect and preserve the corpse. This double casket also had valves installed for Carl to speak into.
He can't just let her rest in peace.
That's just not his style. And apparently, he wasn't the only one doing the talking. Elena's spirit regularly appeared for long chats and renditions of the Spanish songs she had loved when she was alive. After more than a year of Carl's frequent visits, she reached out from the other side with a specific message. She wanted Carl to take her home. With his devotion undiminished, Carl didn't hesitate to heed her instructions. Perhaps because he believed that acting under the light of the new moon would mark the beginning of a new chapter with his dearly departed, on one such night in 1933, he snuck into Key West Cemetery, entered Elena's mausoleum, and took her from the tomb that should have been her final resting place. He placed her remains in a wagon and hauled them home with him. By this point, Elena had been dead for more than a year. Her body might have been kept safe from both the elements and animals, but Carl's attempt to slow the decomposition process had only done so much. So, his first order of business was making his deceased houseguest fit for cohabitation, a process that required him to go to great and gruesome lengths.
Carl shoved rags and towels into Elena's torso to recreate its shape, rebuilt her skeletal frame by binding her bones back together with coat hangers and piano wire, swapped her decayed skin out for silk that had been coated in mortician wax and plaster of Paris, inserted glass eyes into her empty sockets, then drew eyebrows above them. With both the hair she had lost during decomposition and the strands Elena's mother had presented him with after her daughter's passing, Carl made a wig that he stapled to her skull. As a final touch, he splashed copious amounts of disinfectant, perfume, and preserving agents all over her body and his home in order to mask the stench and prevent further rot. I mean, this is truly the stuff of horror movies.
It's definitely not a typical labor of love or, one that most people would want performed on them after they're gone.
Yeah. After her corpse had been transformed into a grotesque copy of the woman she had once been, Carl treated her as his romantic partner. He continued to bring her flowers, but now he filled the vases beside the bed instead of lying them on her grave. He spoke to her, danced with her, and even brought her a breakfast of eggs and Lipton tea. When Christmas came around, Carl put up a tree, lit 13 candles, and played for Elena's body on the organ he had constructed at Trial Bay Jail until the last candle went out.
Carl dressed his lifeless lover in a gown and adorned her with jewelry. At the end of the day, he tucked her into his bed so that they could sleep together every night.
I feel unwell. The smell must have been beyond putrid, even with his attempts to mask it.
I mean, maybe he had switched so much of her body out for alternative materials that there wasn't much left to rot, but the idea of sleeping with any kind of corpse is still nauseating. And Carl wanted to sleep with Elena in every sense of the word. Many at the time speculated as much, but it didn't come out until decades after his crimes were discovered, when a doctor involved in Elena's autopsy revealed in a medical journal that a tube like structure had been placed inside her vagina.
The definition of defiling a corpse, that's sick.
There's no other word for it. Upon examining the cotton at the bottom of the tube, the doctor had discovered sperm. Some have theorized that this finding was kept under wraps to spare Elena's family from the rabid media frenzy that would have followed the revelation that Carl had sex with her corpse. Although he, of course, never thought of it as necrophilia.
For 7 years, Carl lived with Elena's body on the island of Key West. In that time, he conducted different experiments, including more radiation therapy and plasma fluid submersions, all in the hope that one of them might bring her back to life. Having never abandoned his ambition to fly, he had turned a wingless airplane with huge wheels into their home, originally parking it behind the Marine Hospital to take advantage of his access to the laboratory when making these attempts. As a self described scientist and inventor with far too much confidence in his abilities, Carl dubbed the airplane Countess Elena and planned to fly it high into the stratosphere so that the cosmic rays could return Elena to her former glory. He felt that the unflyable plane would somehow manage to accomplish that feat as well as gain the ability to sail on water.
Despite his grand plans, Carl was fired from the hospital after they caught wind of the rumors about his inappropriate fixation with his deceased patient. He couldn't very well remain parked behind his former place of employment, so Carl went on to move Elena to two other locations. He may have hoped that the relocations to a beachfront shack and a ramshackle cottage on Flagler Avenue would keep them away from prying eyes. But people started asking questions. His abrupt disappearance from the cemetery was called into question by the other regular visitors, and neighbors couldn't help but ponder the frequent purchases of women's clothing and perfume by a man who lived separately from his wife. While some of the Count's bizarre behavior could be chalked up to his eccentricity, a later scene observed by a local boy could not. Whether Carl had convinced himself that the situation was perfectly normal or whether he had simply gotten careless, in October 1940, that boy had the misfortune of spotting Carl dancing with Elena's corpse through his window.
My God, the poor kid.
Talk about being traumatized for life.
In the end, it was Carl's decision to refuse to let Elena's sister, Florinda Nana Medina, into her sister's mausoleum that led her to confront him. The only member of her family to have not yet died from tuberculosis, Nana knocked on his door demanding answers. Carl responded by leading her to his bedroom to present his handcrafted version of Elena's body, completely oblivious to the fact that Nana's first sight of her sister would lead to his last. After Nana realized she had mistaken her sister's seriously altered corpse for a revolting rouged effigy, she maintained a remarkable level of outward composure and told Carl that if he returned Elena to her tomb, she wouldn't take the matter further. Carl, of course, didn't take her up on the offer, so Nana alerted the Key West police. Having shown up at Carl's house in a motorcade, the authorities were met with the sight of Elena's body in a wedding gown and veil. With the proof of his crime in front of their very eyes, they arrested him for wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, a charge to which Carl readily confessed.
Given the headline grabbing nature of Carl's crime, the media leaped all over the story. But they didn't give it the critical front page coverage you might expect. Much of the press's portrayal of Carl was rather sympathetic, such as the Miami Herald's reference to his obsession as a death defying love, or a Havana radio station's soap opera portrayal of Elena and Carl's grand romance. Many women followed their lead in taking their compassion for an undoubtedly unwell man a step too far in labeling his actions as bizarrely romantic. They felt for the man at the heart of this tragic love story and went to the jailhouse to offer support by serenading him under the moonlight and giving him gifts of tea, fruit, and cookies. One group traveled from Tampa to bring him money, while the close knit residents of Key West posted his bond. A lawyer even offered his services pro bono.
Has everyone lost the plot? I can see sympathy for an elderly spouse that has lost their companion after a long marriage, and either wittingly or not, lives with the remains for a period of time. But they had a very one sided relationship. He was just a creepy, obsessive, unstable man.
I know. I struggle to see how anyone could see his actions as anything but at least problematic. But maybe it goes back to the idea that stealing slash defiling a body is a victimless crime. It's true that the person is dead, but any living family member slash sane member of society is going to be horrified to hear about that. So it is still hurting people, even if that doesn't include the victim themselves.
Definitely. I think sometimes people are wrapped up in the sensationalism of something and cannot put themselves if that happened to me. Not that you should have to say, if that happened to me, how would I feel? But they just completely like, wow, I don't even know. People are twisted.
Yeah, or they fail to see the person anymore as a person who, had family members.
Yeah, that's probably really what it is.
There was no hushing up the details of this crazy case, and that was partly thanks to Carl himself. He clearly saw no need to hide his actions or intentions because he confessed his desire to heal Elena by flying her into the stratosphere. Yet, during a psychiatric evaluation, a three-person board determined that he was in a borderline state and somehow deemed him competent to stand trial.
Really?
Yeah, not really sure how they came to that conclusion, but it was the 40s, so diagnosing a mental disorder was an entirely different ballgame, I guess. But that trial never took place. The 2 year statute of limitations had expired, so the charges against Carl were dropped and he was released. It's true that prison probably wasn't the best place for Carl, but the man needed psychiatric help. Yes, he believed that he was in love with Elena, but I doubt anyone today would say that made his actions romantic. Even if he thought he was acting in accordance with her wishes, his decision to take her from her mausoleum, reconstruct her corpse, and live with it as his partner points to an untreated mental disorder, not a healthy level of devotion.
Here, here, definitely. She might have died before Carl turned his infatuation into a criminal matter, but Elena was still a victim, and even 9 years after her death, she continued to be exploited. The official line was that Elena's remains were exhibited at Dean Lopez Funeral Home in Key West to put out the fire of curiosity that had brought hordes of visitors into town. But there's no good way to put a positive spin on the reality that 6,850 people, including children who had been released from school early, turned up to gawk at Carl's handiwork over the span of several days. I mean, have people just always sucked?
They really, really have.
Following the popular public viewing, some commended Carl's preservation work and hoped Elena would be displayed in a glass case as a Sleeping Beauty tourist attraction. What the actual fuck?
Yeah, that definitely doesn't go with the Disney version of the story.
Thankfully, authorities disagreed. However, they couldn't return her to the mausoleum or bury her in a marked grave. Carl, who had already had his request to have Elena's body returned to him instead of her family, denied by a judge, couldn't be trusted to leave her be.
To give Elena the peace she deserved, her dismembered remains were buried in an unassuming metal box in an unmarked grave, most likely at Key West Cemetery. But few who knew for sure, such as the three people who buried her, the cemetery sexton, Otto Bethel, the undertaker, Benjamin Sawyer, and the chief of police, Bienvenido Perez, kept their lips sealed.
Good on them.
Because there would have been tabloids willing to pay for that information. Carl returned to the cottage on Flagler Avenue for the 6 months following his release, a length of time he spent recounting his strange story. But when he was ultimately unable to find the location of his beloved, he allegedly planted a bomb at the mausoleum he had built for her, which detonated 2 hours after the Count left Key West for good in 1944. Having wantonly destroyed her grave once more, Carl returned to Zephyr Hills to continue fiddling with his unflyable airplane and his other inventions. He ended up resettling not far from where his wife Doris still lived. Doris consented to care for him in his twilight years, but Carl didn't see connection with the living while he was still among them. As Carl neared the end of his own life, he still longed to relive his time with Elena. He memorialized the affair in a piece called The Secret of Elena's Tomb, which was published in the sci fi magazine Fantastic Adventures in 1947.
Because putting pen to paper wasn't nearly enough to feed his fixation, he also used a death mask to make a life size replica of Elena, which he kept near him until his own passing on July 3rd, 1952. 12 years after his crimes were discovered, 75-year-old Carl died alone in his apartment. 3 weeks later, his body was found on the floor near the full scale wax effigy. The last entry in his diary read, "Human jealousy has robbed me of the body of my Elena, yet divine happiness is flowing through me, for she has survived death. Forever and ever, she is with me." Some who knew Carl believed his possessive infatuation might have evolved into a murderous mindset. Chief of Police Bienvenido Perez, who was one of the 3 people who buried Elena, recalled Carl saying, "I have spent my whole life. I have roamed the earth searching for Elena. 50 years ago, she appeared to me in a vision, and she promised then to be my bride. Now I found her, and I'll kill her if necessary to fulfill my destiny." Elena's sister, Nana, also wouldn't have been surprised if homicide was added to Carl's list of crimes. She remembered him telling her father that if there wasn't a wedding before Christmas, there would be a funeral instead.
These rumors picked up steam when William Michelfelder wrote in his 1982 article, Florida's Dr. Frankenstein and His Laboratory of Love, that the demolition of a wall during the renovation of the cottage on Flagler Avenue turned up a note that appeared to be from its former occupant, in which Carl confessed the murder of Elena. It read, "She died because I gave this to her mercifully. I mixed the root of wolfsbane, monkshood, with aconite diluted. It was palatable, and my loved one departed this miserable world on October 25th, 1931. Suffer no more, sweet Elena. I have sent you to the angels with my golden elixir." The article detailed how one of the demolition workers and his supervisor also stumbled upon bottles of this deadly golden elixir. To lend credence to this discovery, Michelfelder discussed the alleged testimonies from Elena's neighbors, who claimed that in the week leading up to her passing, Carl gave Elena a double dose of his homemade concoction of 70% distilled water and 20% gold shavings with fruit flavoring and enough poison to kill the drinker.
The fatal ingredient that the notes writer mentioned, aconite, has a long and poisonous history. Indigenous to Northern Asia and Europe, the herb is also referred to as wolfsbane and monkshood due to its use and shape. Carl reportedly told several people that Elena had suffered from violent convulsions prior to her death, a detail that was also recorded in the police log at the time. It just so happens that seizures and convulsions are well known symptoms of aconite poisoning. But in the absence of official autopsy records and photos, Carl poisoning the woman he felt he was destined to be with instead of letting her continue to waste away from tuberculosis lives on as just one of the many unsubstantiated theories surrounding the case.
And one that I don't personally put much stock into.
One man who has waded through the theories to get to the truth is Key West singer-songwriter Ben Harrison. Upon learning Carl and Elena's story, he wrote a song that recounted Carl's crack at playing Frankenstein. Soon after, he began playing it at a local bar called The Bull. It became a fan favorite. Ben continued telling the twisted tale in more songs that he wrote into his 2018 musical Undying Love, which shares the same name as his related book.
But before either work was released into the world, it was while Ben was researching the case in the early 1990s that he stumbled upon an old Miami Herald article that referenced the song La Boda Negra. Since negra has no meaning in Spanish, Ben figured that it must have been a misspelling of negra, making the English translation of the title The Black Wedding. A local music historian introduced Ben to a Cuban bolero of that name, in which a man loses his fiancée. He's distraught over her death and spends his nights at the graveyard longing for the days when she was alive. So many of his tears had dripped onto her tombstone that on the night of a thunderstorm, he's able to destroy it. Having used his hands as makeshift shovels to dig his way down to her, he takes her from her grave to his home, where he lays her on his flower covered bed before reciting his wedding vows and killing himself. Given Carl's similar actions, Ben believed Elena had shared the song with him, and Carl then decided to take the lyrics he heard her spirit singing to him on the long nights at her mausoleum as instructions, which is always advisable when it comes to works of fiction.
This is just such a crazy story.
Yeah, I think I first heard about it years ago, but it always stuck with me because it sounds like, as you said, the plot of a horror movie. Next time, we'll be discussing the case of Tom DiBartolo.
All the sources we use for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case for us to discuss, you can email us at culpritpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at culpritthepod on Instagram and at culpritpodcast on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you soon.